Yo, what's up guys, Vakusi here. As you already know, Kafka, the greatest mummy of them all, is finally in the game. Not only is the entirety of the IPC after her, but also the entirety of the player base. As such, Kafka is probably the most anticipated character in the game so far. Kafka is a character that follows the path of nihility, and she does so by using lightning damage. In this video we will go over her traces, her relics, her light cones, team composition and most importantly her stats, because she differs quite a lot from the characters we had so far. With that, let us jump right into it because there's a lot to go over. First, we have her traces, more specifically her basic attack. Her basic attack is, like the name suggests, very basic. She does some single target damage and she gains a little bit of energy. Unfortunately, you are not really going to use that attack because when it comes to Kafka, what you want to use is her skill as well as her ultimate. For that, we need to go over something that most players of Honkai Star Rail have probably not used so far, and that is damage over time. Characters like Sealy, Blade or Jing Yuan are direct damage dealers and Kafka is quite different from that. What she does is that she basically applies damage over time, or dots, to your opponents, and whenever they take a turn, they will take damage. With that in mind, it becomes easier to explain her skill as well as her ultimate. Her skill is called Caressing Moonlight. When used, it will do damage to your target and opponents around that target. The special thing here is that it will immediately trigger all the damage over time on your target. This will not only work for damage over time applied by Kafka herself, but also other characters like Sampo, Luca, Serval or even Himiko. Obviously, the question becomes, how do you actually apply damage over time to your opponents? And the answer here is very simple, her ultimate as well as her technique. Her ultimate, Twilight Twill, will deal lightning damage to all opponents and immediately shock them for 2 turns. This shock effect is your damage over time. It will deal quite a lot of damage whenever your opponent takes a turn, and it will also be triggered for 71% of its original damage when Kafka uses her skill. With that, the next question should be, how do you apply your damage over time on your opponents when your ultimate is not ready during your first turn? And the answer to that is very simple, her technique. When you use her technique in order to enter combat, she will immediately do some damage and apply the same shock effect to your opponents that you get from using her ultimate. That makes her technique one of the most powerful techniques in the game because it is quite literally her ultimate that you open up with. But there's one more way of applying the shock status to your opponents, and that is her talent. Her talent is very simple. Basically what happens is whenever your other characters use a basic attack, Kafka will use a follow-up attack and apply her shock status to the attacked opponent. This shock status, or damage over time, is active for 2 turns and does the same amount of damage that her ultimate shock status would do. Unfortunately, you can only trigger this effect once per turn. With that, we are done with her actual skills, so let us take a look at her passive traces. The first passive is called Torture. What it does is that it basically turns your ultimate into your skill. Like we already covered, her skill will trigger all the damage over time effects on the attacked opponent. With Torture, your ultimate will do the same. Without it, it would only trigger the shock status. Keep in mind though that her ultimate will target all the opponents on the field, while your skill only targets the main opponent that you attacked. Next we have Plunder. Plunder is a very simple trace. Whenever you defeat an opponent that is shocked, you gain 5 energy for Kafka. That's it. Her third major trace, which is Thorns, increases your base chance of applying the shock status to your opponents by 30%. Now, what is that base chance I'm referring to? Does that mean there's an actual chance for Kafka to miss her shock status? Well, yes, that's exactly what it means. And because of that, let us now talk about her stats. First and foremost, and that is very important, damage over time cannot crit. I'm just gonna repeat that one more time. Damage over time cannot do critical damage. So you do not need crit rate or crit damage at all. What you want to have is attack, as much as you can get. On top of that, you want to have this little stat here, effect hit rate. This is a stat that will allow you to work around the miss chance of her shock status. In order to always hit your opponents, no matter what opponent it is, you need 29% hit rate. This changes if you have her first Eidolon unlocked. Eidolon 1 has a lower base hit rate than any of her other abilities. In that case you would need 67% hit rate. The problem here is that you will most likely have to use an effect hit rate chest piece in order to hit that threshold. This is, generally speaking, not worth it because you would lose out on the attack chest piece. So TLDR, go for 29% hit rate and you're good to go. Thankfully, you will already get 18% hit rate from my other passives, if you have them unlocked of course, and as such you will only need 12% more hit rate. Once you have 29%, you will always hit your opponents with her shock status. When it comes to the set itself, Band of Sizzling Thunder is Kafka's best set. It gives her 10% increased lightning damage and 20% attack whenever she uses her skill. You could also use a Musketeer set, but in that case you would only use the 2-set bonus because you're not using her basic attack at all. And as such the 4-set bonus is Giga useless. Of course with that you need another 2-set bonus, and the answer here brings us back to the Sizzling Thunder set. Lastly, when it comes to her ornaments, the best set for Kafka is Space Healing Station. It increases your attack by 24% once you have 120 speed or more. This requirement can either be solved by having enough substat rolls, if you are lucky enough, or by using speed boots. If you somehow manage to get enough speed without using the boots, you can swap them out for attack boots. And when it comes to a chest, the same obviously applies. If you're not using Eidolon 1, or if you decide to ignore it, you simply use attack as a main stat on your chest. And that brings us to her light cones. Obviously her best in slot weapon is her signature one, so if you have that one, use it. If you don't have it, it depends on what you have access to. It also depends on the level of superimpositions you have, but as a general rule of thumb, you can simply follow the list I'm going to mention now in a descending order. The first one is Good Night Sleep Well. This one comes from the Stellar Warp and it is very good, even at low superimposition levels. After that we have Eyes of Prey. Though for that one keep in mind that the effect hit rate you get from the light cone is kinda wasted on Kafka, so it's better to use it on characters like Sampo. After Eyes of Prey we have World Signature Light Cone. You get that one from the Stellar Warp, but also here keep in mind that it's a 5-star cone, so kinda difficult to get. And lastly we have the first free-to-play option, which is Fermata. You can buy Fermata from the Forgotten Halls vendor and it is fairly easy to max out its superimposition level because you can just buy it over and over again, so it's a very good free-to-play option. If you don't have any of these, then simply use whatever you have and work your way towards Fermata. Or you could use your Frimo gems on the current Lightcone banner, because this one is actually worth it, as it not only gives Kafka's Lightcone, but also Eyes of Prey. With that, we are done with everything you need to know when it comes to building Kafka if you are free to play. If you decide to invest into her Eidolons, I will quickly go over these now, but if you decide to stay at Eidolon 0, you can skip this part and I will see you guys at the team composition. When it comes to her Eidolons, I will try to keep this super simple. Most of her Eidolons straight up increase the damage she does, by a lot actually, but Eidolon 1 is a little bit different, so let us talk about that one in more detail. What it does is that her follow-up attack will increase the damage over time your opponent takes by 30%. This unfortunately has a lower base hit chance than any of her other abilities, and that is why you need the 67% hit rate I have mentioned before. Generally speaking, you lose out on too many stats if you try to hit those 67%, but if you're close to it, then try to go for it. Every other Eidolon, like I said, is not really that important to talk about because they basically increase either the damage Kafka does or the damage the entire team does. Now let us talk about team composition. First and foremost, your own team composition might look different compared to mine, based on your own characters, your artifacts, your traces, as well as your Eidolon levels. For example, you are more likely to use an E6 Serval compared to an E0 Sampo. But if you follow the basic idea of the guide, you should be fine, right? So what we are going to do is to use 2 support characters as well as 2 DPS characters. One main DPS character in the form of Kafka and a support DPS character in the form of any character who applies damage over time. That can be Sampo or Luca. They are both, at least currently, the best characters when it comes to that. But you can also use Serval or Himiko. After that we have our healer. Just use any healer you have. Doesn't really matter as long as it's a healer. And lastly we have our second support character who increases the damage we do. You're most likely going to use Silverwolf here if you have her, because Silverwolf, quite frankly, she is the most broken character in the game. So if you have her, use her. If you don't have her, use Pila. Pila is also really good. You could also use Tingren or Asta. Asta especially once you have Eidolon 4. Unfortunately, you can't use Yukong because Yukong increases your damage over your crit damage, and like we already talked about, damage over time can't crit, so Yukong is quite literally the most useless character when it comes to a Kafka composition. What you might also encounter or see from time to time is this. Triple damage over time, right? We already talked about her kit. Basically, the more damage over time effects you have on your opponents, the more damage Kafka does, right? So triple damage over time works really well. Of course, you still use a healer character because at least in the current meta, we need healers in the team. But besides that, you can use triple damage over time, or you just go as a simple route and use Silver Wolf or Peeler, right? And with that, let us now talk about my own honest opinion when it comes to Kafka, and after that we are basically done with the guide. Alright, so this will basically be completely unscripted. I'm just gonna ramble a little bit and give you my own honest opinion when it comes to Kafka. And the first thing I want to mention here is that in my opinion, she single-handedly changes the meta of the game, right? Or at least she adds more variety to it. So far it has always been about characters like Sealy or Blade doing the biggest numbers possible, but now that Kafka's in the game, damage over time becomes more important than it has ever been, right? And on top of that, it revitalizes characters like Sampo, Serval, or even Himeko, because they are all damage over time characters. So when it comes to that, when it comes to her playstyle, it's, in my opinion, 10 out of 10, right? More variety is always good for the game. And Kafka, at least when it comes to playstyle, is everything I wanted her to be, and I'm absolutely happy with it. When it comes to her character, I would say that 99% of the community agree that she is a 10 out of 10. Absolutely perfect design. There's a reason why everyone calls her mommy, and I absolutely agree with it, right? Personally, I think on top of that, her voice actress also did an outstanding job with Kafka, especially when it comes to her ultimate. That boom sound she does is, I don't even know how to describe it. It's absolutely perfect. I don't know, is her ultimate ready? No, it's not ready. So I can't use it now, but whatever. Yeah, like generally speaking, oh, there it is. Yeah, perfect. I don't know. Yeah, generally speaking, my opinion when it comes to Kafka should be quite clear. It's a 10 out of 10 character. Definitely worthy of being the most anticipated character in the game so far. And probably, I would guess, also the most sold character in the game so far. I know that the next character is going to be Fishfang, the Divination Commission girl. I've seen a few leaks when it comes to her, and her ultimate looks absolutely amazing. I don't want to spoil anything, so you will see it eventually yourself, but that, I guess, is another character to look forward to. Yeah, that's basically it. If you have any suggestions, any tips on how to improve the guide, stuff like that, then feel free to drop it in the comments below. Other than that, leave a like, a sub, a comment, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.